Hey Guitar Champion, what's going on? I'm Justin Hornbach back from my practice dojo and welcome to today's video, the second part of my interview with Jacobra Records, where we are talking about a tool that could change the world of amps forever. Welcome to today's video, here we go. %. Yeah. Okay, speaking of real guitar playing to real guitar tones, there's something coming up currently on your YouTube channel. Some new series that we talked about that you showed me, and I watched the videos, and I thought it was quite interesting, where you're talking about how to create and how to design your own kind of amp sound and your own kind of sound by only frequencies and a little bit of clipping. And for me, there you probably have to know my backstory, because when it comes to amps and sounds, I know nothing. I know shit. I never really owned a tube amp in my life. I'm playing now for 20 years. I always was the digital guy. My first amp was the Line 6 Pot 2, then the Vetta 2, and then the Kemper, and everything digital. And every sound that I had was presented by me on a silver plate. Always like perfect delay, perfect lead sound, perfect rhythm thrash sound. I never had to tweak sounds. And by that, I never really learned how to deal with sounds. And currently I'm on a journey. I'm currently taking lessons from a good friend of mine, Francesco Filigoy, here, where he's showing me how to use amps and how to set up amps in a digital world and all this kind of thing. And I'm currently like a child in a candy store, learning so many things, and then seeing your videos where you're telling like, okay, an amp is basically just frequencies, and a cabinet is also basically just frequencies. So why not putting them together in the door and then just creating your own sounds, or like cloning sounds. And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that with you, because I think that's quite interesting. I showed that to some friends of mine who are more like old school and traditional, and they had some interesting thoughts about this. But how did you come up with this? So what was the initial idea behind this?
So it all started with the cabs being just EQ thing.
Yeah.
Basically an impulse response, is the sound of a guitar cab with a mic in front of it.
Yeah.
So it's what we hear on like a recording, basically. And really all that is an EQ curve. So let me do it this way. An EQ. Really all that is an EQ curve. Now, how I figured that out was very convoluted. I have a bachelor's of science in recording arts.
Nice.
And I got that in 2017 is when I graduated. But I've been recording since 2012. And I've only discovered, the whole thing about the cab being an EQ within the last couple years, actually. I know I put out that video maybe like 6 months ago or something. But I actually discovered the whole thing before that and hadn't really like fully fleshed it out. What it was is there was a random YouTube video, an extremely random YouTube video from this guy that is not a YouTuber. He's just a random guitar player.
Okay.
And I forget what it was titled, but it was titled something like "Use EQ instead of an IR." And his whole thing was like, impulse responses aren't tuned to your actual guitar. You should just use EQ instead. It sounds better. And I was like, it's bogus. And so I like watched his video and I was like, it definitely doesn't sound better when he uses the EQ, but it does sound kind of like a cab. And so it got me thinking. I was like, okay, like this guy's not right, but it is interesting how he's using EQ and it does sound like a cab. And so over time, I just kind of played with the idea, and I saw like Buster Odelholm. I saw him doing something where like he was taking the DI of a guitar and he was like low passing it, carving off all the high end, like before it hit the amp. And I was like, that's interesting. That's kind of like what a real cab does, right? It kind of just like rolls off that high end. And it got me thinking. I was like, what if I just did that with like EQ, and I like tried to recreate a cab with EQ? I wonder. So I just started experimenting, and I got pretty close, and I was like, whoa, this is weird. And then I was like, what if I use like one of those match EQ algorithms, So I used the match EQ. Like I already had it close, and then I used match EQ, and it sounded like the exact same. And
what is exactly as a match EQ?
So match EQ listens to one signal and then compares it against your current signal, and then it changes the differences.
All right, I see. I got it.
Yeah. So maybe your signal is a little bit darker, so it doesn't have as much of the treble. So instead, the match EQ brightens the treble a little bit to match it. Now it's obviously like really detailed and does all these little tiny moves. But eventually I realized that if I just took enough time and really, really dialed in that EQ curve, I could actually make it sound just like the actual impulse response without even needing match EQ. It's pretty crazy. Because this whole time, everybody's using impulse response loaders, using IR loaders. You have to have an app for loading IRs. Then you have to download IRs. And there's all these settings. It's just complicated. It doesn't even need to be complicated. It's just that. And part of this, a lot of people will argue. It's like, well, no, there's like what about the time domain? There's the amount of like reverb that like the cab has essentially. The problem is when you take an impulse response, you're taking like, I think it's less than 20 milliseconds is what it is. There's not enough time to hear the reverb. It's so short that the little tiny bit of reverb tail, you don't actually hear it. Like it's so negligible. Maybe it's 1%, but it's just so negligible that we don't even need to worry about it. And when you're doing a heavy guitar tone, a chuggy rhythm guitar tone, you don't even add reverb on it. So if anything, the idea of not having any reverb would be better. So that's kind of what led me to that. And then I started watching Jim Lill. You ever watch Jim Lill?
No.
Bro, that shit'll change your life. Jim Lill is a guitarist out of Nashville. And he is, I would say that he's more of like a guitar scientist, which is kind of what I'm trying to be. He does experiments and finds out where the tone in things come from. So he has a video that says, where does the tone in a speaker cabinet come from? And, he breaks it down to literally all it is the speaker. Has nothing to do with it being a 4x12 versus a 2x12.
Okay, interesting.
Right. It has nothing to do with the box itself that it's in. It's going to sound the exact same when it's mic'd up. It's going to sound the exact same. So he's got really interesting videos. And one of his videos is about where does the sound in an amplifier come from? And that's when he just dives into it, and he dives in real hard. And the thing about his video is eventually he realizes he can just use an EQ pedal and then a distortion pedal and then an EQ pedal, and he can make it sound like each of these amps, that he loves. He loves this like Fender amp, and he loves like, I think he did a Vox AC30 as well. And then there was like another, it might've been like a Marshall or something. I can't remember the exact amps, but they were each a different flavor. And he was able to just tweak some knobs, and it sounded like each of these amps. And he'd figured out a way to just recreate these amps just using the EQ and clipping. But he didn't give you the keys. He didn't tell you how to do it.
Okay.
He doesn't show you the settings. He doesn't explain how you can change those sounds to make it sound like another thing. And that's what I'm trying to do. Because he basically said, look, this is all it is, but I'm not going to tell you the secrets on how to do it. I am like, I don't know how he did it, but I'm going to figure it out.
Okay.
So I just dove in, and I started tweaking, and it was a ton of trial and error. Because when you feed distortion, it creates different harmonic. Like if you feed low frequencies into the distortion, it's going to create mid harmonics, which sound muddy. Boom, 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 boom. If you cut those lows, then it's going to create a sound more of like a 5150, where it's more like chunk, 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 chunk. And then you add the lows in post. So you bring those lows back so it doesn't sound thin. Versus like a doomy guitar tone, you don't want all that chunk, chunk, chunk. So you leave all those low frequencies to distort. So there's just, I started to figure these things out, and just with trial and error, using a load box, taking the actual sound of just the head into my computer, just for tweaking it. Most of these amps, when I would clone them, it would take me between an hour and 2 hours before I got something that I was actually like, okay, that is really close. But sometimes it would only take me like 30 minutes. I'd be like, that's like it. That sounds like it. I think the Vox AC30 might have been that way.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, I really like this kind of concept because it's demystifying the whole amp kind of thing. And I'm a man who loves science. I'm a man who loves explaining things and understanding how certain parameters work. And I'm not a big fan of who this Marshall has a specific magic source to it or something like that. And I think it's super interesting to see amps just like frequencies that are changing and frequencies that you are adding or taking out of the signal, all these kind of things. And maybe the distortion is also some own parameters by itself, which makes the distortion. No, it's also frequencies.
It's just hard clipping. All it is a hard clip, which a hard clip is like, imagine a digital ceiling, like the digital ceiling of your output. Yeah. And you're just hitting it as hard as you can. That's hard clipping. That's all we're doing. We're doing the thing that we're told not to do.
Yeah. That's exactly what people are telling me to not. Be careful when you're setting your gain on the interface.
Exactly. And now that's a little different because you're talking about input gain, and that's distorting the preamp. Preamp distortion acts different. We're talking about digital clipping, which everybody says digital clipping sounds bad. That's like the thing that people have come up. And I love the point that you just mentioned.
This is in a studio situation, because the one thing that, for example, friends of mine were asking about or questioning about this kind of method, where like, does it work in a live scenario? Because like the feeling of playing an amp and hearing the speaker vibrating and all these kind of things. How was your experience with that, comparing live to the studio scenario?
Yeah, so I took a bunch of precautions when making these videos. The first amp clones that I made were from my Axe-Fx. I used one of the Axe-Fx models and then cloned that. And I was like, okay, I can do it. Once I realized that I could do it, I knew that if I released those, people were gonna be like, yeah, well, you made a clone of a modeler. Of course you can do that. You can't make a clone of the real thing. Yeah. I knew there were gonna be people that said that. So instead, I borrowed the real things. You can see here, I got a real Marshall JCM800 that I borrowed from Fluff. It's like a $3,000 amp.
Yeah.
And that's why I got all the real things, because I was like, look, I want to put as little doubt in people's minds as I can that they'll actually try it, because this is such a cool thing. And I really think it could make big moves if people actually try it. In the clones that I show in the video right at the beginning, where I'm like, can you tell which one is the real thing? Those are coming through my real cab. So when people can't tell which is A and which is B, that's coming through my real cab. So it's the same scenario that it would be live. It sounds the same. I'm playing through, a riff, or I'm playing different stuff, and it sounds the same.
Is there a difference? Is there a difference in feeling? That when you say, no,
because feeling is kind of what you were saying earlier, where it's that kind of magic foo-foo, right? It's feeling, to me, like if you break it down scientifically, it has to do with when you play softer, it distorts less. You play harder, it distorts more. Yeah. And that's just how EQ into clipping works.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's just how it works. Because if you play softer, you're not creating as much high frequencies. And so then when you dig in, you're creating more high frequencies, which creates more distortion. It's like, it all just, literally what I'm doing with the filtering and then clipping is the same thing that's happening inside the head.
I don't know. I'm not an amp guy. I always say I don't trust tubes. I only trust ones and zeros.
How old are you?
I'm 35.
35. Damn, okay, so you would have came up in the generation of real amps.
I mean, yeah, everybody around me had real amps, but again, for me, like the first amp was the Line 6 Pod 2, and then I stick with line 6. I thought the concept is cool, and nowadays I kind of regret it to not had amps before, because when I would have the money, I would get an amp. I mean, I got a Blackstar from Blackstar, and it was kind of cool, but it was like something that I may turn on in the evening and just jam around a little bit. But I would love to have an amp to really understand the how this kind of amps works, you know, the characteristic of an amp. I know there are
Yeah.
certain amps that I like. I really like the EVH, for example. That's kind of my sound where I really can dig into. Ironically, I absolutely don't like mesas, even though that Petrucci is my biggest heroes of all time, but I don't like the sound of mesa amps.
Well, there's a thing with mesas.
Yeah.
Mesas are extremely versatile in a bad way, I would say. It is, you can make a mesa sound like ass.
Yeah.
But you have to really tweak it to make it sound good.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
So versus like a 5150, it's really hard to make it sound bad.
Yeah.
You know. So I mean, that's like a part of it.
And I once had the experience. I mean, I don't know. Do you know the YouTuber HP42? Henning Pauli, the guy, the bald guy who always wears like weird kind of clothes and is doing review stuff and sound stuff. He's a kind of, I don't know, like 200,000 YouTuber subscribers or something like that on YouTube. He lives not too far away from me, and he has a huge studio because he's doing these kind of really high-end reviews of stuff. And I was at his place, and I was talking like I never really played over a tube amp, and he was like, okay, we get some pizza, you stay here overnight, we can turn up everything. And he got out like a Marshall from, I don't know, 69 or something like that, and we really cranked that up. And it was an experience. It was a really interesting experience because it felt so differently, you know, in the stomach as well. Like, you know, you got that punch in your guts. And also from what I've played, because the start of the discussion was, okay, that, for example, Jimi Hendrix, Eddie Van Halen, etc., they would have played different stuff when they already would have an XFX or a Quad Cortex or something like that. And for me, I realized when playing over the real tube amp, I was not really playing fast. I was emphasizing slow melodies and slow notes because I loved that kind of chaos that happened in the harmonic kind of spectra, where you know in the digital world, okay, when I have bent this note and I have sustained this note and this will happen. There's this kind of unpredictable chaos in the tube world that really fascinated me.
That's interesting. I think that a lot of that, I will say, I think that's a placebo effect, 100%.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
If you watch Jim Lill's video, he compares the difference between a tube amp and a solid state amp. And unfortunately, you really can't tell the difference. I think what happened there is, what kind of cab do you play at home?
At home, here, I don't have a cab. I only play over my normal monitor boxes.
Right. And I could have guessed that because I think that is exactly what happened. If you, here's a problem. Okay. You know what FRFR cabs are? Right. Those are just a PA speaker. Those are not, in my opinion, those are not made for guitar. Those are made for vocals, hence why they have a tweeter that produces high frequencies. A guitar cab does not have tweeters. It does not produce those high frequencies. It rolls off right about 6K, versus an FRFR speaker does. And the roll-off point is at a different point. So what that means is the speakers are going to be voiced differently. They're going to sound different, versus a guitar cab speaker would not sound good with vocals through it because it's voiced for guitar. It's supposed to sound good with a guitar head going through it. Yeah. An FRFR cab does not. If you just put a head through an FRFR cab, it sounds like shit because you have to emulate a cab. You have to put an impulse response because the speaker is not voiced for guitar, which means that you are emulating the sound of something that sounds really good and then filtering it again, putting it through another speaker. So it's never going to sound as good as your real cab with actual speakers that are voiced for doing that. And so as soon as you crank real speakers that are meant for that, dude, you can't get around the sound of vintage 30s. These vintage 30s in this cab are just, ooh.
But you would say you can recreate this with your method of frequencies?
So here's where it gets a little bit convoluted. That's what you
Okay.
would think. That's what you would think, but you really have to think about the science here. Remember, an impulse response, you're putting a microphone in front of a specific portion of the speaker. And if you think about production studios, you may have heard of people buying robots to move around the microphone, right? For one, you don't need to do that anymore. I proved in my video that you can move around the microphone with just EQ. So you don't need the robot whatsoever. For two, think about it. If you are using an impulse response, it is the sound of that speaker in that specific location and then being filtered by the sound of that microphone. That microphone's not completely flat. It has its own sound. And it's in that specific spot. Versus when I'm sitting out here listening to my cab with vintage 30s, I'm not hearing that speaker in a specific spot being filtered through a microphone. There is no way to physically recreate the sound of an actual vintage 30 speaker. You can recreate the sound of an impulse response. You can recreate the sound of the speaker being mic'd with something. You could mic it with any microphone in any spot and recreate it with EQ. But you still cannot recreate the actual sound of that speaker because we have no way of recording the actual sound of that speaker in all positions, completely flat without any microphone. It's just impossible. There's no physical possible way to do it. And so that is where the kind of distinction lies. Is like, that's one of the reasons that I very much preach, use real cabs live, use vintage 30s live, get a real cab. I mean, especially if you're playing less than 2,000 capacity rooms, you need a cab. Okay. Those tiny PAs are, I mean, for one, they're not going to have enough power to make your guitar sound thick. They're not placed in the right place to make your guitar sound thick, but they also don't have the right speakers to make your guitar sound thick. So yeah.
Interesting. I mean, yeah, but kind of a microphone is nothing else like an ear that is recording a specific sound, but an ear can be, from every person, can be so different, and the perception of sound is so subjective. And in microphone, you know, the SM57 and ribbon sounds always like this or this. But it's super interesting because what you say in your video is that you can, with this kind of method, you can create your own distinguished kind of signature sound to it without using an amp. But isn't that really hard? Because I mean, isn't that kind of a good thing of the amp that you just put on the amp and have a sound? Or because for me it kind of feels like, okay, figuring out how the microphone sounds in a specific way, isn't that like a lot of trial and error and checking out and understanding the frequencies and the curves and all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I understand where people are coming from with that. I think that's just a misunderstanding of the concept.
Okay.
And I think what people are seeing is, it's kind of like what I had to do. I had to do it in a way of showing, hey, look, if you do this, it sounds exactly like this thing that everybody loves. But that's not my point. I'm not saying bust out the match EQ and make it sound exactly like your Cali cabs from Get Good Drums. I'm not saying that. I'm saying make your own. Don't even worry about it. Why even worry about the impulse response? Just make it sound good.
Yeah.
Just tweak it and just make it sound good. You know, then you're not flipping through a ton of different IRs and then EQing that IR afterwards. Just skip all that. Just EQ it from the beginning.
Yeah.
The thing, and that's where a lot of people get confused. You don't need to make it sound exactly like the cab. You don't need to spend all this. You don't need to spend 30 minutes working on it. I mean, you could, but you could dial up the sound of your own impulse response in 10 seconds. Literally, I could do it right now. And I'm going to do it with a custom amp. I'm going to show you in a minute. You can make your own custom amp sound. And yeah, like 10, 30 seconds, like definitely less than a minute. You just have to, pull up three plugins. You set an EQ curve on the first one. You distort the second one. You set an EQ curve on the last one. It's really not complicated.
Crazy. Okay.
It's just the fact that people are trying to think like, okay, how do I get these specific values? You don't really need those specific values. I am showing you those to show that it sounds the exact same as a real amp. You can use those as a starting point and then make your own amp from there.
I mean, and basically, when seeing cabinets and amps as just one frequency that in a specific parameter are curved or kind of waved or something like that, you can basically recreate every amp, because the specific or the characteristic of an amp is that he is, kind of, boosting the bass or the mid-range or something in a specific kind of way. But you can see it. I mean, it's basically just one line, and you're highing this up or you're flattening this down or something like that. And by that, you could actually, when you see it like this, you can recreate every amp. It doesn't matter anymore if it's a Mesa or an EVH or a Marshall or something like that. It's all just one frequency line that you set in a specific way.
Right. And that's what I was trying to show by posting 3 videos at once. I was trying to show, like, look, here's 3 different amps with very different sounds. They all have different characters to them. But yet I was able to recreate them all with this method. There's a comment, saying, oh, well, of course you can do this to a 5153. It's just high gain. I'd like to see you do it with something low gain, like a Vox AC30. And I replied to that comment. I was like, guess what? I already did. Go watch the video, because that's the whole point of why I did all 3, is I wanted to say, like, look, guys, we can do any amp. I wanted to get more amps and start with more amps. You really can. I as far as anything that I've tested this against, it has worked. I've replicated a tube screamer pedal. I've replicated a swollen pickle pedal. That one was very difficult. I've replicated a Fender 65 Deluxe, so a really clean amp. I think that's it.
What would you say would be the hardest amp to recreate out of your experience?
Fuzz distortion. Fuzz distortion is tricky. When I did the swollen pickle, I had to use a parallel path in order to create the sound of it. And that's where we're going to get into advanced stuff. But I want to introduce this concept and get people to start trying it before I introduce the complicated stuff. Because people are seeing this and they're saying, oh, that's complicated. It's really not. And I'm trying to explain to people it's not. And I'm going to create some like short reels that are me creating an amp in like 15 seconds or less to show, like, hey, look, here's me making a super quick amp. And I'm going to do it for you in a second. I need a fucking noise gate. It's so noisy. I live in Seattle, where there's a ton of doom bands.
Okay.
And let me tell you, I've heard that guitar tone a lot. Now, that was just me messing around with it for like a minute.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Crazy.
Now imagine if you actually took some time and really tweaked it.
Yeah.
You just saw a little bit of versatility there, but
the possibilities there are endless that you can do, because you are controlling the smallest element in an amp. It's like you would control the atoms or the quantums or something like that. And with that, you can change every parameter. That's super interesting, because that's basically what a sound is, based on, frequencies.
And I show you that you can use your phone to do this, because like I have GarageBand on my phone, and I just loaded up a custom EQ that has like 7 bands on it, and I was able to do the same thing. I just used an interface, an iRig interface, going out the same rig, and it was the same thing. I've got that in those videos. So Ooh. Well, that works. Theoretically, if you had an interface for your phone that had multiple inputs and multiple outputs, you could bring no rig.
Yeah.
You could just bring, just cab and power amp, and then all of your amp tones are coming from your phone.
Crazy.
I mean, especially if somebody makes an app that is specifically for that, I could see a future being right there. Nobody wants to bring around a laptop. I'd much rather just use my phone that's in my pocket. I'm not using it while I'm on stage anyways.
Yeah. And it sounds like a more beautiful future than something that has to do with AI, to be honest. Because you're doing the sound by yourself, yeah.
The art is still there. You're still like, if anything, it's you're creating more art because it used to be that you had to use other people's amps. Now you can use your own amp.
Yeah.
And I just think that's really cool because think about when you're on tour and a head doesn't work. Something breaks on the head. Now you have to find another head, and it's not going to sound the same.
No.
I mean, maybe it's the same head, but probably not. I mean, there's just instead, you just use the computer. If your computer breaks, you can just break out another computer or use your phone, dial up the exact same settings, and you have the exact same tone.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like, to me, completely further. So I think, yeah.
All right, so far so good, Jacob. Thank you really, really much being on this channel and having this really now nearly 3-hour-long talk about the IR stuff, the new kind of way to create an amp, but also your approach and your kind of experience when it comes to debunking fake guitar players. It was a really interesting talk, really a pleasure. And what are you planning next for your channel? Are there any more kind of stuff planned besides the amp stuff, or is the amp stuff the one thing that you want to focus on right now?
Yeah. First, thank you for having me. This is really fun. I love talking about it. Very fun. Hopefully it was insightful for the audience.
It definitely was. For me, it was.
Yeah.
And I assume for the audience as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Hell yeah. Yeah, and I'm like an open book. If you want to ask me questions about the cloning or something, hit me in the DMs. I'll message you back. Yeah, moving forward, I've been really trying to do live streaming a lot. So, if
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to follow me on Twitch, I'm trying to grow the Twitch. I really love video games. So that's mostly probably what I'd be doing on Twitch, but I also just get on there and play guitar and stuff like that.
Nice.
But I'm going to do that. I'm probably going to open a second YouTube channel that's like Jacobra Games.
Oh, wow. Really nice.
Yeah, that's been my plan. I want to do something kind of like Queso, if you know him, where he does like kind of like full game playthroughs, or like Markiplier. So I'm going to try to do something sort of like that on the side because I love mixing it up. But I'm also going to do some videos about my experience with I Declare War, and then my experience with Enterprise Earth.
Okay.
And there's going to be some real good juice in those. So
okay, interesting.
Prepare for that. That's what I would say. And then also prepare for me to make some more clones of your favorite amps.
Nice.
Next, I'm probably going to tackle a company that uses AI, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah, interesting. Great. So can't wait for the juice. Let the juice flowing in your YouTube channel. It's always fun to see. And for everybody who haven't followed Jacobra Records yet, definitely do this now. Check the links in the description box. There you'll find more about his work, his Twitch channel, his Discord community, and more. Highly recommend to check it all out. Thanks so much again for being here. And thanks for everybody who watched this and viewed this. I'm going to see you soon. And keep practicing. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.